The air was thick with the scent of wet pavement, and the dull glow of the streetlights barely pierced through the heavy mist that curled around the empty road. The night was cold, unforgiving. The few cars that passed by did so in a hurry, their headlights slicing through the darkness before vanishing into the distance. Yet amidst the silence of the sleeping town, a lone figure remained. A dog. He was not just any stray, wandering in search of food or shelter. He was different. There was something unsettling about the way he sat, still, unblinking, his gaze fixed on a single point in the distance, as if he was waiting for someone. His fur, once golden and full, was now matted and streaked with dirt, his ribs pressed against his thin skin, a sign that he had not eaten properly in a long time. The rain had soaked him to the bone, yet he did not shiver. He did not move. For 6 weeks, he had been coming to this exact spot. Every morning he arrived, every evening he left, only to return again the next day. Some people noticed him, but paid little attention. Others whispered about him, wondering why he never left, but no one knew his story. Not yet. It had started on a seemingly ordinary day. Margaret, who ran the small grocery store across the street, had first seen him on a Monday morning as she unlocked her shop. She had not thought much of it at the time, just another stray, perhaps abandoned. But the next day, he was there again. And the day after that. By the end of the second week, everyone in the neighbourhood had noticed him. The bus drivers, the street vendors, the school children who passed by in the mornings. "He is waiting for someone," Harold, the newspaper vendor, muttered as he watched the dog one evening. "But for whom?" asked a man who had overheard. No one had an answer. Some tried to help. A kind woman, Olivia, had approached him with food, kneeling down with a gentle smile. "Here, buddy," she whispered, holding out a piece of bread. "You must be hungry." The dog lifted his head slightly, sniffing the air, but then he turned away. He did not beg. He did not approach. He was not looking for food. He was looking for someone. The heartbreaking pattern. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Olivia decided to stay and watch. She sat quietly on a bench nearby, pretending to check her phone, but her eyes never left the dog. And then, it happened. A bus pulled up to the stop. The dog's ears perked up, his body tensed with anticipation. His tail, which had hung limp all day, gave a slight wag. His eyes scanned the faces of the passengers stepping off the bus. One by one, they walked past him. The excitement in his body began to fade. His tail dropped again. His ears flattened, and then he sat back down, defeated. As the bus pulled away, Olivia felt a lump rise in her throat. He was not just waiting. He was hoping. But for what? Or who? The days passed. The story of the waiting dog spread. Some people left food and water by his spot, even though he rarely ate. Others tried to call animal rescue, but whenever someone came too close, the dog would back away, never running, but keeping his distance. People began calling him Ghost. "He does not belong to anyone," Margaret whispered one morning, "but he also does not act like a stray." "Then, who does he belong to?" asked Ruth, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighbourhood for decades. No one had the answer. But Olivia, she could not shake the feeling that this dog had a story, a reason for waiting, and she was determined to find out the truth. One night, after another long evening of watching the dog, Olivia made a decision. She would follow him. As the town fell into silence, and the last bus of the evening rumbled away, the dog finally stood up. His legs were slow, stiff from sitting all day. And then he walked. Olivia followed at a safe distance, her heart pounding. The dog moved through the quiet streets with a familiarity that suggested he had done this walk many times before. And then he stopped in front of an old abandoned house at the end of the street. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The house was dark, its windows covered in dust. The fence was broken, the grass overgrown. The dog walked to the porch, hesitated, and then curled up by the front door. Like he had done it 1,000 times before, like he belonged there, Olivia's heart ached. She did not know the full story yet, but one thing was clear. This dog had once had a home, and now he was waiting for someone to come back, someone who never would. But who? And why? The truth was more heartbreaking than anyone could have imagined. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what Olivia discovered next would change everything. Olivia stood outside the abandoned house, her heart pounding. The dog, Ghost, as people called him, had curled up by the front door, his body pressing against the wooden frame as if trying to remember the warmth that once lived inside. The air smelled of damp earth and dust. The windows were dark, lifeless. This place had been empty for a long time. Olivia took a hesitant step forward. The dog's ears twitched, but he did not move. He was not afraid of her anymore, not like before. Something about this place held his heart captive. But why? Olivia glanced around, wondering if anyone knew who had lived here. She made a mental note to ask Ruth, the old woman who had recognized the dog. Maybe she held the missing piece to this puzzle. She crouched down, speaking softly. "You are waiting for someone, aren't you?" The dog lifted his head slightly, but his eyes remained distant, locked on a memory Olivia could not see, a memory he refused to let go of, and Olivia was determined to find out why. The next morning, Olivia knocked on Ruth's door. The elderly woman answered, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of her. "You are the one who watches over that dog," she said knowingly. Olivia nodded. "I need to know about the house at the end of the street, the one Ghost sleeps in front of." At the mention of the house, Ruth's expression softened. That was Daniel's home. The name sent a chill down Olivia's spine. Who was Daniel? Ruth sighed and gestured for Olivia to come inside. She led her to a small kitchen where the scent of tea filled the air. As they sat at the wooden table, Ruth folded her hands and spoke. Daniel was a retired soldier. He moved here years ago, after his service, lived alone, except for that dog. They were inseparable. Olivia swallowed hard. What happened to him? Ruth's gaze dropped to the table. He died? About 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks. The same amount of time Ghost had been waiting at the bus stop. Olivia felt a lump rise in her throat. How did he die? A heart attack. Ruth said softly, "It happened while he was in the city. He never made it back home." The words hit Olivia like a punch to the chest. Ghost was not just waiting, he was waiting for Daniel. Waiting for the man who would never return. The weight of the truth settled in Olivia's chest as she walked back to the bus stop that afternoon. She had her answer now, but it did not make the sight of Ghost any easier to bear. He sat in his usual spot, his gaze locked on the empty road, ears perking up at every passing bus, only to droop again when Daniel never appeared. She sat beside him, her throat tight. "He is gone," she whispered. "He is not coming back." But how could she expect him to understand? How do you explain loss to someone who does not understand words? She reached out slowly, resting a hand on his back. His fur was cold, damp from the light rain that had fallen earlier. "I cannot bring him back," she murmured, "but I can give you a new home." Ghost did not move. He did not reject her touch, but he did not lean into it either. He was still waiting. As the days passed, Olivia refused to give up. She continued to visit Ghost, bringing him food and sitting with him for hours. Others in the neighbourhood followed her lead, Harold left a warm blanket near his spot. Margaret started setting out a fresh bowl of water every morning. Even the children who passed by on their way to school would stop to say hello. But Ghost remained rooted to his spot, bound by loyalty to a man who would never return. One evening, Olivia made a decision. It was time to take him home. She arrived with a leash, her heart pounding. She had never forced Ghost to do anything, but she knew he could not stay here forever. The cold was getting harsher. His body was growing weaker. She crouched beside him, speaking gently. "Come with me, Ghost." He turned his head slightly, but made no effort to move. She reached for his collar, slipping the leash around his neck. The moment the clasp clicked, Ghost tensed, his body stiffened, his eyes flashing with something Olivia had never seen before, panic. He pulled back suddenly, twisting free of her grasp, and then he ran. She had never seen him run before. Her heart pounded as she chased after him, calling his name. But Ghost was fast. He darted through the streets, past the grocery store, past the newspaper stand, past the bus stop, until he reached the one place he knew best, Daniel's house. He skidded to a stop on the porch, his body shaking. Olivia stopped a few feet away, catching her breath. She could see the fear in his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell rapidly. She had pushed too hard. "I am sorry," she whispered. She unclipped the leash and stepped back. For a long moment, they just stood there. Then, Ghost did something. The transition was not easy. Even after Olivia brought Ghost home, he still waited by the door every evening. He still flinched at loud noises, still turned his head whenever a bus passed by, but slowly, he began to change. He let Olivia brush his fur. He started eating regularly. One night, he curled up on the couch beside her, resting his head on her lap. And for the first time in weeks, Olivia saw something new in his eyes. Not just sadness, but trust. Months passed. Ghost, now called Max, never forgot Daniel. Some nights, Olivia still caught him sitting by the door, staring at the empty street as if listening for something only he could hear. But he was not alone anymore, and neither was Olivia. One day, as they walked together through the park, she whispered, "He would be proud of you, Max." Max lifted his head, his tail wagging gently. Love never truly dies. It just finds a new home. Loyalty like this is rare, but it is real. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in kindness, subscribe for more stories like this, because love never truly fades. The seasons changed. The cold, harsh winter melted into spring. Flowers bloomed, the streets filled with life again, and the sun warmed the town in golden light. But some things never changed. Every evening, just as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Max would sit by Olivia's front door, gazing out at the road. He was no longer the frail, starving dog he had once been. His fur had regained its golden shine, his body had grown strong, and his eyes, once filled with sorrow, now held something else, peace. But some habits were hard to break. Even now, months after Olivia had taken him in, Max still looked out at the street, as if waiting for something, or someone. Olivia had accepted that a part of him would always be waiting, and that was okay, because love never truly leaves, it lingers. In memories, in the quiet moments, in the spaces between heartbeats. Max was living proof of that. One evening, as Olivia and Max walked through the neighbourhood, they passed the old bus stop, the place where Max had waited for so long. Max slowed his steps, his ears perked up. Olivia watched as he gazed at the empty bench, at the street where Daniel had once stepped off a bus every evening. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur. "You miss him, don't you?" Max's tail wagged slowly, but his eyes remained on the spot. Then something surprising happened. An old man, Harold, the newspaper vendor, walked up to them. His voice was soft, careful. "You know, I met Daniel once," he said, adjusting his glasses. Olivia turned to him, curiosity sparking in her chest. "You did?" Harold nodded. "He used to buy the paper from me every morning before catching the bus. Quiet man, but kind. Talked about his dog a lot." Olivia felt a lump in her throat. "What did he say?" Harold chuckled. "Said that dog was the only real family he had. That no matter how hard life got, no matter how lonely he felt, he always had someone waiting for him." Max lifted his head at the sound of Harold's voice, his tail wagging slightly. Olivia knelt beside Max, whispering, "You were his family, Max, and he was yours." Max leaned into her touch, his warm body pressing against her. Maybe he understood. Maybe he always had. That night, Olivia sat on her couch, scrolling through old photos of Daniel she had found in the town's archives. A younger version of him standing in his military uniform, a picture of him at the local coffee shop, smiling with a group of strangers who had likely become friends. And then, the one that made Olivia's breath hitch, a blurry photo taken by someone in the neighbourhood, Daniel at the bus stop, Max sitting beside him, both of them side by side, staring down the road, waiting for the bus. It was never about the destination. It was always about the return. Max had never given up on Daniel. And even though Daniel was gone, Olivia knew, deep in her heart, that Daniel would have wanted Max to move forward, not to forget, but to live. The next morning, Olivia and Max walked back to Daniel's house one last time. The abandoned structure stood silent, its windows covered in dust, its walls worn from time. Max stood in front of the door, his tail wagging faintly, his ears perked up as if listening. Then, slowly, he stepped forward and pressed his nose against the wooden door, a final farewell, a silent promise. Olivia felt her chest tighten. She knelt beside him, wrapping an arm around his strong body. "He loved you, Max, and he would be so proud of you." Max licked her hand before turning away from the house, and just like that, he walked forward without looking back. Because moving forward does not mean forgetting, it means carrying love with you wherever you go. And Max, he was finally ready. Loyalty like Max's is rare. It is pure. It is unconditional. Dogs love with everything they have. They do not count the days. They do not measure time. They just love. And sometimes they wait, even when the world tells them to move on, even when their hearts are breaking. Max's story is not just about a dog who waited. It is about love that never fades. It is about hope that refuses to die. It is about the unbreakable bond between two souls, one that death could not sever. Max found a new home, but Daniel will always be a part of him, and that is the kind of love worth remembering.